Mr. Minister, we have taken note of the decision of the delegation of Bahrain to organize an open debate on maritime security. We thank UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, Arsenio Dominguez, and Nick Childs for their briefings. As you know, Russia did not support the idea of discussing maritime security in the UN Security Council, since it is being substantively considered at the relevant specialized platforms. However, the overall maritime security situation that has recently developed in the world's oceans not only poses a serious threat to global world trade and is a factor in the development of the global economic crisis, but can also serve as a trigger for military escalation. The situation is that threats to maritime security now come not so much from pirates or other criminal elements, but from the new filibusters of the 21st century, EU countries that do not hesitate to seize and arrest merchant ships, grossly violating the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. At the same time, unlike pirates who hung out the Jolly Roger on their ships, a black flag with a skull, Western countries are trying to cover up their illegal actions with references to unilateral coercive measures, OPMs. We would like to remind the proponents of legal approaches in other contexts that, according to the UN Charter, only sanctions imposed by the Security Council have legitimacy. There is no concept of a shadow fleet in international law either. All this is just a fig leaf designed to cover up the fact that the EU is engaged in outright robbery at sea. And today, we are again hearing about the rules-based order that the Europeans are once again passing off as international law. We would like to remind you of the obvious. Under the law of the sea, a coastal state cannot stop a false flag vessel for inspection at its own discretion. Such steps, even in territorial waters, are a gross violation of the right of innocent passage, and in international waters they are an encroachment on freedom of navigation. These are the fundamental norms of customary international law enshrined in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Their inviolability, as well as the principle of the exclusive jurisdiction of the flag state over the ship, ensures the stable and predictable functioning of the international maritime trade system. Therefore, the Convention contains an exhaustive list of grounds when a state can stop a vessel for inspection in the exercise of these rights and freedoms. The actions of the EU countries that encroach on the norms of the law of the sea can trigger a domino effect, the result of which will be the cessation of the global maritime trade system. At the same time, the involvement of NATO naval forces and means to detain ships is a direct path to military escalation. Mr. President, Ukraine's armed attacks on civilian ships flying the Russian flag or transporting Russian energy in various parts of the world's oceans deserve special attention. These actions are a direct threat to international peace and security, not to mention the fact that seafarers from different countries of the world, including European ones, suffer from them. Such attacks are increasingly taking place in the immediate vicinity of the shores of countries sympathetic to the Zelensky regime, and the question arises as to their involvement in these attacks. As a result, significant damage is caused to the environment. Economic damage is caused to coastal states, and trade relations between countries are disrupted. From November 2025 to April 2026, 17 attacks were carried out on merchant ships flying the flags of various states, including the flags of the Russian Federation, Malta, Sierra Leone, Liberia, the Gambia, and the Comoros, in the Black and Mediterranean Seas alone. A blatant case of violation of international law is the terrorist attack on March 3, 2026 by unmanned boats and drones of the Kiev regime on the Arctic Metagas gas tanker under the Russian flag in the Mediterranean Sea. As a result of it, an explosion occurred, and the vessel, which had more than 100,000 m3 of liquefied gas on board, was engulfed in flames. Now the gas carrier, which has received significant damage, is drifting in the Mediterranean Sea. Taking into account the nature of the cargo and the availability of bunker fuel, there is a risk of catastrophic consequences for the environment, life, and health of the population and the coastal infrastructure of coastal states. The coastal states themselves, which were involuntarily involved in the incident, have expressed only deep concern about the threat of environmental damage. However, they did not find the courage to give a proper assessment of the fact of the attack on a civilian vessel committed in the immediate vicinity of their shores. Another recent example is the attack by an unmanned boat on the Altura tanker on March 26, 2026, which was 15 nautical miles from the entrance to the Bosphorus Strait. The vessel was seriously damaged, which led to its sinking and loss of speed. At the time of the attack, the tanker was carrying about 140,000 tons of crude oil. Imagine the catastrophic consequences of spilling so much oil off the coast of Turkey. We call on all states that respect the 1982 Convention and wish to prevent escalation to take a principled position, condemn these acts, and use all available means to counter their commission. Mr. President, it should be noted that Western countries, which detain ships in violation of international law and tacitly support Kiev's terrorist actions, have a completely different position on navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, loudly and groundlessly blaming the Islamic Republic of Iran for the current situation. I am touched to hear how these foreign ministers of the EU countries sitting in front of us, as well as those EU members who will speak later, shamefully bypass the root cause of the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. How can they offend their overlord? Let the suzerain no longer care about these countries. We would like to remind you that the situation in the Strait of Hormuz is a consequence of the unprovoked U.S. Israeli aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has resulted not only in colossal suffering for civilians in the entire region and a rapid collapse of stability in the Persian Gulf, but also in large-scale consequences for the global economy, energy, and food security. The Persian Gulf countries provide the world market with 1/5 of all oil, more than 1/3 of liquefied natural gas, and supply significant volumes of ammonia, phosphates, and sulfur. When the entire region began to burn as a result of the treacherous attack by West Jerusalem and Washington, they tried to hang all the responsibility on Iran, as if it was Tehran that attacked its neighbors and deliberately blocked navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. But in wartime, a coastal state that has been subjected to aggression can restrict navigation in its territorial waters in order to ensure security. Let me remind you that until February 28th, before the decision of the United States and Israel to attack Iran, there were no serious disruptions in the movement of merchant ships in the Persian Gulf. Hence, a completely natural question arises. Why was it necessary to start everything then? The answers lie on the surface, including the desire to overthrow an undesirable regime and fish in troubled waters. But today, we hear only arguments about imaginary threats. The price for this adventure is being paid by the friendly capitals and peoples of the Persian Gulf. countries. Russia firmly advocates a ceasefire and a return to the political and diplomatic process in order to resolve existing differences while ensuring the security interests of all states in the region without exception. We support the relevant starting of our Pakistani friends. We hope that the parties will strictly adhere to the current truce and give diplomacy a chance to reach final agreements. We urge you to abandon bellicose rhetoric and the implementation of hawkish plans to resume a major regional war. Such a scenario will only lead to new suffering and casualties among the civilian population, further undermine the stability and security of all regional members, including Israel, and will certainly not help to unblock the Strait of Hormuz. Thank you for your attention.